Chapter 1. New York Orphanage, 1893. You will never leave this orphanage if I have anything to say about it. Never. Rachel did her best to keep her eyes on the floor while the director of the orphanage, Miss Johnson, yelled at her. She knew if she looked up even for a brief moment she would likely get slapped. Miss Johnson didn't tolerate any eye contact. She closed her eyes and did her best to pretend she was somewhere else. She pictured herself in her old home. Mama was singing as she made dinner and Papa was reading the old family Bible, tapping his foot along with the song. Rachel was snuggled on her Papa's lap, feeling secure that all was right in her little world. Eventually, Miss Johnson saw another child doing something she didn't like, and she headed in that direction, already yelling, leaving Rachel in the middle of the hallway, her entire body shaking. She wished more than anything that Mrs. Jensen was still the director, but she turned her job over to Miss Johnson 6 months ago. Mrs. Jensen had been firm and strict, but she had also been fair. It seemed like Miss Johnson had two personalities. The first one was nice and sweet, and this was the one she showed when the men who owned the orphanage came to inspect the orphanage. The second personality was the one she saw today, yelling and hitting. Rachel had heard rumors that some of the other women who worked at the orphanage were trying to get rid of Miss Johnson, and she desperately prayed that she would eventually be fired. She didn't understand why Ms. Johnson kept telling her she wasn't going to let Rachel leave the orphanage. Where would she go? She remembered that her best friend Sophie, who had left a year ago to live in a girls' home in North Carolina, had promised her that when there was another opening, Rachel would be able to come. But Rachel didn't believe that would ever happen. Rachel wiped the tears from her cheeks and went into the kitchen to help with the evening meal. The cook, Mrs. Clark, smiled at her with sympathy, but didn't say anything. Rachel washed her hands and then started to chop multiple heads of cabbage. The next few hours sped by as she helped Mrs. Clark with the meal and then with the dishes after the soup had been eaten by all the children. When she had washed the last dish, Miss Johnson stalked into the kitchen, gave Rachel a dirty look, and then whispered something to Mrs. Clark, who nodded in agreement. Then Miss Johnson left the kitchen without looking at Rachel again. Mrs. Clark watched Miss Johnson leave, shaking her head. She turned to Rachel. "It seems there is someone in Miss Johnson's office who wants to see you," Mrs. Clark told Rachel. "I'll finish the dishes. Why don't you run down there and see who it is?" Fear flooded through her heart. The last thing she wanted to do was go to Miss Johnson's office where more abuse would likely occur. What if she hid in the utility closet for a few hours, but she knew if she didn't obey, she would eventually be punished. Rachel left the kitchen and slowly walked down the hall to Miss Johnson's office. It was open, so she stood in the doorway until she was noticed. She immediately saw a tall, thin man standing inside with his hands in his pockets, looking out of the window. Miss Johnson was seated behind her desk, with a fierce frown on her face. "Hello, Rachel," Miss Johnson greeted her sweetly. "Come in and meet Mr. Wilson." The man turned and smiled at her. Rachel instantly liked him, but she wondered who he was. She walked in and shook his offered hand. Mr. Wilson immediately started to tell Rachel why he was there. "Do you remember that your friend Sophie came to live in Mary's home for girls in North Carolina? She asked if you would be able to come when there was another opening, and I promised her that you could. We now have an opening, and I have come to get you." Rachel stared at him in disbelief. Did she hear him correctly? She was going to be able to leave the orphanage? She would be able to see Sophie again? "Let me tell you a little bit about Mary's home. You will be one of 10 girls who live there. It is run by a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Davis. They will educate you and teach life skills that you will be able to use when you are an adult." Miss Johnson broke in. "I was just telling Mr. Wilson that you really can't leave the orphanage. Don't you remember the news I gave you about a family who wanted to adopt you?" Rachel looked at Miss Johnson in confusion. There was a family who wanted to adopt her? But she was too old. No one wanted to adopt a 14-year-old. Miss Johnson gave her a fierce look, and Rachel instantly knew she was doing her best to stop her from leaving with Mr. Wilson. Miss Johnson turned to Mr. Wilson and smiled sweetly. You wouldn't want to stop a child from getting a real family, would you? May I see proof of this family? Paperwork, anything to prove there is a family who is planning on adopting her, Mr. Wilson asked, looking at Miss Johnson as if trying to determine if she was telling the truth. Rachel was amazed to see Ms. Johnson drop her eyes, since she always used them to control those around her. You will just have to take me at my word. The paperwork isn't complete yet. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat. I have my own paperwork that will let me take Rachel to North Carolina. Mr. Davis made sure it was okay to come and get Rachel before I even left Mary's home. Everything is in order. I should have no trouble taking Rachel with me. Who did he converse with? Miss Johnson asked. Mr. Davis's lawyers talked with the men who own this orphanage. Mr. Wilson pulled some papers out of his pocket. I have the papers here if you would like to see them. Miss Johnson stood up. I don't want to see the papers. I think we should let Rachel decide. She glared at Rachel, letting her know exactly what she expected Rachel to say. Rachel, would you rather be adopted by a real family or go with this man, a total stranger? Rachel started to shake. Did she dare say what she wanted? She knew Miss Johnson was lying about the adopted family. What would the woman do if she stated what she really wanted to do? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I want to go to North Carolina. She kept her eyes closed but could hear Miss Johnson huff her displeasure. Go then, Miss Johnson hissed, but don't expect to take anything with you. She turned to Mr. Wilson. I must ask you to leave at once, and you better not come back here for any of the other children who are here. Mr. Wilson nodded once. That is not your decision to make, is it, Miss Johnson? He took Rachel's arm and led her out of the room. He didn't say anything to Rachel until they were outside the orphanage and progressing down the steps. Miss Johnson isn't a very pleasant woman, is she? Mr. Wilson asked her. Rachel didn't dare say anything. What if Miss Johnson changed her mind and came out here to force her back into the orphanage? Let's be on our way. Mr. Wilson helped her into a black buggy that was sitting in the dirt-packed driveway. We are going directly to the train station. Rachel sat back against the wooden seat, willing the driver of the buggy to go as fast as possible. Over the next few hours she held her breath as Mr. Wilson bought their tickets, and then some food to eat on the train. Mr. Wilson sometimes asked her a question, but Rachel only nodded or shook her head in answer. She kept a lookout for anyone who might look like Miss Johnson, her eyes darting quickly around her surroundings. Only when she was on the train and it pulled away from the station did she start to relax. Mr. Wilson allowed her silence until the train had been in motion for an hour. I'm thinking that you could do something for us, Mr. Wilson finally said as he looked at her. Something isn't right in that orphanage. Am I right? Rachel looked at her lap, still silent. You are blessed, you and Sophie. You were both chosen to live at Mary's Home for Girls. You both have been given an opportunity to learn new skills and to be educated. Not every orphan will have this opportunity. Rachel nodded her head slightly, letting him know she was listening. But there is something you can do for those children that are still at the orphanage. You can tell me what Miss Johnson has been doing. Maybe you could say something that might change things for the other children. Rachel thought about Mr. Wilson's words. Was he right? If she told him what Miss Johnson had been doing, the verbal and physical abuse, would he be able to stop her? Again, she made an instant decision. Mr. Wilson was able to help her. She knew he would be able to help the other children. Okay, Rachel agreed, speaking for the first time since she left the orphanage. I'll tell you. Chapter 2. 6 years later, North Carolina, 1899. 6 years later, North Carolina, 1899. Rachel placed the sleeping child she had in her arms into her crib and tiptoed out of the room that they both shared. It had taken a long time for Evelyn to settle into sleep, but Rachel now had a few hours of free time, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. She walked out of Mary's home and headed towards her favorite bench in the gardens. She had a big decision to make. She sat down on the wooden bench and breathed in the fresh spring air. She could smell the roses nearby, mixed in with tulips and daffodils. The oak tree above the bench provided just enough shade this time of day in late spring. She started to think about the last 2 years of her life. She had been able to help the children in the orphanage. On the train, she had told Mr. Wilson all that had been going on in the orphanage, even though some of the events she had witnessed and gone through were very hard to talk about. Later, when she arrived at Mary's home, Mr. Wilson had asked her to tell Mr. and Mrs. Davis what she had told him. Mrs. Davis had taken immediate action. Within a few weeks, Mrs. Johnson had actually been arrested for abuse to children. Rachel found out later that the cook, Mrs. Clark, had been given the job as director. Rachel had been very pleased when she heard of this change. Mrs. Clark was a wonderful, warm woman who loved the children she helped care for. Rachel knew Mrs. Clark was the perfect replacement, and she felt good that she had helped make the changes that were needed in the orphanage so that the children who lived there would be cared for properly. When she grew older, she met a young man who lived in one of the large homes on their street. His name was Michael Wilcox. They met when she was 16 years old and he was 20 years old at a church activity. Rachel had fallen instantly in love, and Michael seemed to like her too. Over the next few years, they did what they could to meet with each other. It had to be in secret because Michael's parents would not have approved of a friendship with an orphan girl, even if she lived in Mr. and Mrs. Davis's home. When Rachel was 18, she received terrible news. Michael had become engaged to a young woman who his parents approved of. He had to stop meeting with Rachel. She was devastated. Michael had always talked about how someday the two of them would sneak off and elope. A few months after Sophie left to marry Zach, Michael gave her a note one Sunday during church, asking her to meet him at their favorite spot. Rachel had willingly and happily met him. During that meeting, Michael had told her he had broken the engagement with the other girl. He loved her and wanted to marry her. Rachel was thrilled. Michael still insisted they keep their relationship a secret until he felt it was the right time to break his news about her to his parents. Rachel was so happy Michael wanted to marry her that she willingly went along with his plans. For a few weeks, everything was wonderful. And then it happened. Michael convinced Rachel they could sleep together since they were secretly engaged. Rachel had wanted to wait until they were married, but she eventually let Michael talk her into it. Rachel never saw Michael again after that night. She found out from one of the other girls in Mary's home that Michael was still engaged to the other girl and the wedding was scheduled to be held in a few weeks. Even though all the girls in Mary's home had been invited to the wedding reception, Rachel had not gone. Michael left North Carolina soon after his wedding to take over part of his father's business in another state. A few weeks after Michael's wedding, Rachel's world came crashing down. She discovered she was pregnant and was overwhelmed with uncertainty. Should she tell Michael about the baby? Should she reveal to everyone who the father was? After much contemplation, she resolved that Michael would never know about the child, and no one else would ever learn the truth about the baby's father. Rachel was able to hide her pregnancy for a few months, but eventually, Mrs. Davis figured it out. She sent Rachel to live in the country with her sister until the baby was born. Luckily, Rachel gave birth to a girl, and Mrs. Davis allowed Rachel to return with her baby and stay until she decided what she wanted to do. She named her baby Evelyn after her mother. She never spoke of Michael, although she suspected Mrs. Davis guessed who the father was. Now that Evelyn was 6 months old, Rachel knew it was time for her to make a different choice about her future. She couldn't stay at Mary's home indefinitely. She didn't want to take advantage of the Davises' hospitality, although they never made her feel she needed to leave. Rachel pulled out the letter she had in her apron pocket from Sophie that she had received the day before. Sophie was very happy with her life in Montana and with her husband, Zach. She was expecting a child. Rachel was thrilled for her. Until that moment, she could never understand why some of the girls who lived in Mary's home had made the decision to be a mail-order bride. Why would someone want to travel to a place they've never been before to marry someone they didn't know? In fact, when Sophie left, Rachel promised herself she would never become a mail-order bride. But now she was starting to understand. No one in North Carolina was going to want to marry her, an orphan girl who had a baby out of wedlock. For the rest of her life, she would be considered a loose woman. This would also affect her daughter as she grew older. She knew she needed to leave North Carolina. Her only choice was to become a mail-order bride like Sophie. She made a promise to herself. She wasn't going to fall in love with the man she would eventually marry. She couldn't allow herself to trust another man. Never again. If she was able to find someone who wanted to marry her, she would agree only for Evelyn's sake. Chapter 3. Thornton Winters looked up as his father's secretary, Mr. Jones, knocked on his open office door. "Yes?" Thornton asked politely, although he really wanted to tell Mr. Jones the last thing he wanted to do that day was talk to his father. That would be the only reason Mr. Jones would be in his office. "Mr. Winters would like to speak with you if you have the time," Mr. Jones said in a formal voice. Thornton wondered what would happen if he told Mr. Jones to tell his father he didn't have time to meet with him. "Tell him I'll be there in a few minutes." Mr. Jones nodded and left. Thornton leaned back in his cushioned chair. What did his father want now? He hated that he had to work for his father in his bank. He had known since he was a small boy that he would be expected to go to college and then return to learn how to run and operate Winters Bank, a business that his grandfather had started years ago. It was one of the more prestigious banks in Lincoln, Nebraska. He had wished many times when he was a child that his mother would have had another son. Then maybe he wouldn't have been pressured to be groomed and eventually take his father's place as president of the bank. His father had insisted that Thornton start at the bottom of all the jobs at the bank, and he actually hadn't minded starting out in the mailing room. In fact, he enjoyed working at the lower-paying jobs more than the position that he now had, which was over loans and foreclosures. It had taken him 5 years to reach his current position, and there were some days he wished he could go back to sorting mail and filing papers all day long. He despised dealing with loans, especially initiating foreclosures on overdue accounts. His father was adamant about following strict protocols for past due loans and refused to entertain the idea of granting extensions. In Lincoln, his father had earned a reputation as a ruthless businessman, and Thornton feared he was beginning to be seen the same way. Thornton suddenly threw his pen down on his desk. He might as well go and see what his father wanted and get this meeting over with. He probably has decided to proceed with foreclosing on Mrs. Whiteman's house, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. Mrs. Whiteman was an older widow whose husband had died 2 months ago. Regrettably, Mr. Whiteman left behind quite a bit of debt. Thornton's father wanted to foreclose on her house to pay back the debts, even though Mrs. Whiteman only owed very little on the house itself. The house was quite large and was located in a prestigious part of Lincoln. The problem was, Mrs. Whiteman didn't have any family to help her, and if the bank foreclosed on her home, she would be homeless. Thornton had met with Mrs. Whiteman at her home a few days ago. He found out that the older widow was planning on taking in boarders to help pay for her husband's debts. She wanted to turn part of her home into a boarding house and planned to serve breakfast and dinner to anyone who rented a room. Thornton thought that her plans were a sound idea and was willing to suggest to his father to give her a few more months, but he also knew his father wasn't going to agree. He wanted that house. He walked to his father's office and stood at the doorway. His father was busy writing a letter and didn't look up, even though Thornton knew his father was aware that he was there. Thornton played the game, waiting until his father acknowledged his presence. After a minute, his father looked up. "Thornton, come in and sit down," he ordered, without smiling a greeting at him. Thornton took a seat, knowing he would be waiting for a few more minutes. While he waited, he studied his father. He looked younger than his age, distinguished with thinning salt and pepper hair. He kept himself fit, not letting himself gain any weight. He had a slight frown on his face as he signed his name with a flourish and placed the paper in a stack of other letters to be mailed. "Mr. Jones said you wanted to see me. If it's about Mrs. Whiteman's house, I really think—" Thornton started to say when his father finally leaned back in his chair and looked at him. Mr. Winters waved his hand to silence him. "I have something more pressing to discuss with you." Thornton stayed silent, wondering what his father had up his sleeve now. You will be turning 25 in less than 6 months, old enough to be thinking about settling down and starting a family. Yet, I am not seeing you make any effort to do this." Thornton felt confused and wondered why his father was suddenly so concerned about his single status. After all, his father had been almost 30 years old before he had married Thornton's mother. "I know that you think you will receive your trust fund when you turn 25, but I have been thinking about changing the terms." It was all Thornton could do to keep silent. The money his father was referring to was money set aside for him by his late paternal grandmother. Thornton had great plans for that money. It was one of the reasons he was biding his time by working in the bank. The money his grandmother had put into a trust fund would be enough that, if he wanted to, he could live his own life and do what he wanted. "You will still be able to receive the money like your grandmother instructed, but I am going to add a clause." "A clause? Father, you can't do that. It is a trust fund, and legally—" "I am the caretaker of the fund, as your grandmother requested. I can't keep the money from you, but I can extend the duration to which you receive it. But I am willing to let you have the trust fund as long as you are married before that time." "What?" Thornton almost shouted. "Do you mean I have to find someone who wants to marry, court them, become engaged and married, all within 6 months?" "Yes," Mr. Winters responded. "I don't think you should have a problem with this new requirement. I believe Patricia Loveland would be interested in marriage, and if you need help thinking about other young women who might want to marry you, I'm sure your mother or sister would be willing to help." "I don't need help finding someone to marry, Father," Thornton growled out. "There just isn't anyone in Lincoln who I'm interested in, including Patricia Loveland." Mr. Winters scowled at Thornton's words and stood, indicating the meeting was over. "Well, I suggest you become interested in someone as soon as possible, otherwise you will not receive the money until you turn 30. "Can't we discuss this?" Thornton asked, almost pleading with his father. Mr. Winters shook his head. "No, my decision is final. I will inform you that your mother is in agreement with this. You are moving up quite quickly in this bank, and it is time you marry before you progress any higher." Thornton glared at his father and then quickly left the room. He glanced at the clock in the lobby of the bank and saw it was almost closing time. He decided he would leave for the day. He needed to think. He hated that his father tried to control everything in his life. Thornton had his own dreams and plans, dreams his father knew nothing about, plans he would never dare tell his father. All of his life, he had wanted to be a minister in a small town. He had great plans for that trust fund. It would be used for schooling, to become a man of the cloth, and then some could be used to help the poor and to work with teenagers who came from troubled homes. He had never told his father about his dreams because he knew his father would be livid that he wanted to use his money for religion. His father would not understand that Thornton didn't want to work at the bank for the rest of his life. Only one person knew about his dreams, and that was his younger sister, Dorothy. He made an instant decision to go to his parents' house and talk to Dorothy. Surprisingly, Dorothy was close to their father, and there were times she had been able to get him to change his mind. Chapter 4. Thornton strode down the street towards his large family home, where Dorothy still lived with their parents, and where Thornton had lived until a year ago when he was able to rent a small home. He smiled to himself when he thought of his sister. He knew Dorothy was the one who should be working in the bank, not him. Dorothy loved anything that had to do with the bank. She had shadowed Mr. Winters whenever he would allow her to, ever since she was small, even though their father refused to hire her since she was a woman. Thornton knew Dorothy could likely do all of the jobs he had been trained to do. He wished their father would forget about social propriety and allow Dorothy to work as she wished. But he also knew that would never happen. Dorothy's job was to look pretty and marry well. Thornton let himself into the family home and was immediately greeted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Newton. "Hello, Thornton," Mrs. Newton said with a smile. "It is good to see you. Will you be staying for dinner?" Thornton shook his head. "I have plans this evening. I am here to speak with Dorothy. Is she available?" "I last saw her in the library," Mrs. Newton told him. Thornton thanked her and headed to the large library located in the north end of the house. Sure enough, when he entered the room, he saw Dorothy curled up on a comfortable sofa with a book in her lap. He did notice she wasn't reading, though. She was looking out of a nearby window with a pensive expression on her face, and he wondered what she was thinking. She turned when she heard his footsteps and smiled with delight. "Thornton," Dorothy said as she rose and gave him a hug. "It's good to see you. Is the workday over early today?" "I needed to leave. I want to talk to you. Do you have some time?" Thornton asked as he hugged her in return. "I always have time for my favorite brother," she teased as she settled herself back on the sofa. Thornton sat beside her, taking her hand in his own. He briefly noticed that she was dressed in a pretty pink day dress that complemented her dark hair, the same color as his own. She was no longer a girl, but a young woman at age 19. "I just talked with Father. Did you know he changed the terms of my trust fund from grandmother?" Dorothy looked shocked. "No. Why would he do that?" "He wants me to marry before I receive it. If I'm not married by the time I'm 25, I won't get the money until I'm 30. Dorothy squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry, Thornton. I don't know why he would do something like that." "I do. It's another way to control me." Thornton let go of Dorothy's hand and ran it through his hair in frustration. "I wish you both would get along better," Dorothy said softly. Thornton ignored Dorothy's words. "If I don't get that money, you won't be able to start your plans to be a minister," Dorothy finished for him. "Do you think he knows what I am planning?" Thornton asked her. "I've been so careful to hide them." "I haven't said a word, if that's what you're asking," Dorothy retorted. "But you know that Father has ways to find out what he wants." Thornton nodded, knowing Dorothy was right. "What am I going to do? I don't like any of the girls that Father and Mother would approve of. I'm not ready to be married. I didn't want to marry until I finished school to be a minister." They sat in silence for a while, both thinking their own thoughts. After a while, Dorothy spoke. "I have an idea, but I'm not sure you're going to like it. Just tell me what it is." "Just this morning, I was looking through the newspaper ads. I saw a few for mail-order bride agencies." "What do you mean?" Thornton asked with confusion. "I guess a man can send a letter to different agencies back east requesting a mail-order bride. The agency matches him with a young woman who would like to come west. They write to each other for a period of time, and if they both agree, she would travel to where the man lives. Then they would marry. Just like that? There is no courting, no long engagement?" "Something like that, anyway." "What woman would want to leave her home to marry a man she has never met? I think there could be women out there that might be looking for an adventure or for a better life. Some might not even have a family. I'm sure there are many reasons why a woman would choose to be a mail-order bride, just like there are many reasons that a man would send away for a mail-order bride." Thornton leaned his head back against the sofa and closed his eyes. Dorothy wisely kept silent while he thought about her suggestion. At first he wanted to reject it. It sounded absolutely crazy. But he made himself think about it logically and soon realized it might not be a bad idea. He could choose a woman that he wanted, not have one chosen for him by his parents. He wouldn't tell her about his family's money, so he would know for sure she wasn't marrying him to get rich. He doubted he would ever love her, but maybe they would at least be able to have a friendship. "You know, maybe I should look into your idea. Do you know how I should start this process?" he asked Dorothy. Dorothy's face lit up. "Yes, there were 3 different ads in the paper. You could send a letter to each one and see which one responds." "Will you help me?" "Sure, I'd love to. Let me go find the newspaper." Dorothy left the library, and Thornton stood to look out of the window his sister had been gazing out of when he first arrived. Was he crazy wanting to try this idea? He knew his father wasn't going to change his mind, and he needed that trust fund. He didn't want to wait until he was 30 to start the process of becoming a minister. It was time to stop allowing his father to control him and take charge of his own life. And this was going to be his first step. He was going to send away for a mail-order bride. Chapter 5. Rachel walked into Mary's home, carrying Evelyn on her hip. She had just returned from talking to Mrs. Adams, the woman who ran the mail-order bride agency, through the local newspaper. Rachel was relieved when she didn't see anyone as she entered the house. Mrs. Adams had given her a letter from a man who lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Rachel wanted to read it in private. She wasn't ready to tell anyone her plans. Evelyn was fussy and needed a nap, so Rachel took some time to feed her and put her to sleep. When she was finally able to lay Evelyn in her bed, she spent a few minutes watching her. Though she hadn't planned on getting pregnant without getting married, she loved Evelyn very much. The baby stirred in her sleep and her lips moved as if sucking. Rachel brushed Evelyn's hair away from her eyes and then picked up the letter. She sat in a chair near a small desk and slit open the envelope. She opened the single-page letter and immediately noticed the handwriting. The man who wrote this had been taught the art of fancy calligraphy. She knew immediately that he was an educated man. To whom it may concern. My name is Thornton Winters, and I reside in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'll be turning 25 in a few months. I'm seeking a young woman interested in corresponding to get to know one another with the ultimate hope of building a connection that could lead to marriage. I went to college for a few years and took classes in business. I am working in a bank right now. I have dark brown hair and hazel eyes. If you are interested in writing back, please let me know what you are like and what you expect in a relationship. Sincerely, Thornton Winters. Rachel stood up and started to pace. Is this really what she wanted to do? She thought over the information Mrs. Adams had given her. She should only write to one man at a time. They should exchange at least 3 letters before making a decision. If she decided she didn't want to marry the man, she was to write one more letter out of courtesy and let him know of her decision. She wasn't sure if Thornton was the one she should write first. She thought she would feel something when she read the letter, but she felt nothing. Maybe it was because she had been so hurt by what Michael did, she wasn't capable of feeling anything. Or maybe she just needed to give Thornton a chance. Rachel pulled out a drawer of her desk and pulled out a piece of paper and pen. She sat down and started to write. She told Thornton that she grew up an orphan and lived in a girls' home in North Carolina. She let him know she knew how to care for a home and she enjoyed cooking. In fact, Mrs. Davis allowed her to help with all of the meals in Mary's home, instead of finding work outside like the girls were required to do when they turned 18. Mrs. Davis knew it was better that Rachel was Evelyn's main caretaker instead of giving her to someone else while Rachel worked. She told Thornton that she had a 6-month-old daughter, but she decided she had better not tell him she hadn't ever been married, so she wrote that she was a widow. As she sealed the letter, she promised herself that if Thornton was interested in continuing to write, and if he eventually asked her to travel to Nebraska, she would let him know the truth before she left. 3 months later, Rachel lifted Evelyn to her shoulder and patted her back as the baby finally drifted off to sleep. They had been traveling on the train from North Carolina for almost a week and were scheduled to arrive in Lincoln, Nebraska in just a few hours. She was glad the trip was almost over. Evelyn hadn't traveled well. The movement of the train had made her sick. She cried quite a bit, making the people who sat near her move as far away from her as they could. There was one time an older woman had gotten on the train and had chosen a seat right next to her. She smiled kindly at her and proceeded to help her with Evelyn until she got off the train at the next stop. It was the only time anyone had shown any kindness to her and Evelyn. She hoped this wasn't a sign of what was to come. Would she be accepted by Thornton and his family? Over the last few months they had exchanged letters, and she learned quite a bit about Thornton. She learned that his father owned and ran the bank he worked at, and he didn't like his job. He had a younger sister who was about a year younger than himself. Only his sister knew he was writing her, although he assured her his family would accept her without any problems. Rachel started to wonder if Thornton's family was rich, even though he hadn't written about that fact. After all, his father did run a bank. She wasn't sure how she felt about that, but she couldn't bring herself to ask him. She enjoyed her correspondence with Thornton and started to look forward to each of his letters. When he finally sent the letter asking her to travel to Nebraska to marry him, she decided she wanted to give this a chance. He was fine that she had a daughter, although she never could bring herself to tell him the truth about Evelyn. "I'll tell him the truth about Evelyn when I arrive, before we marry," she whispered to herself. Mrs. Davis had pulled her aside when she found out Rachel was planning on leaving. She gave Rachel some money that she could use if things didn't work out and she didn't marry Thornton. She wanted Rachel to have an option to return to North Carolina or to start over somewhere else. Rachel was grateful for the money and accepted it with the idea that if Thornton didn't want to marry her because of Evelyn, that she would find a boarding house. She knew how to cook. Maybe she would be able to find a job at a restaurant that would pay her enough to support herself and Evelyn. In the last letter Thornton had sent, he let Rachel know he wanted this marriage to be a marriage of convenience. He wanted their relationship to just be a friendship. He informed her if she was okay with this, then she could come to Nebraska and they would marry. If she wanted more out of the marriage, then she was free to return the funds he sent for her train fare with no hard feelings. He didn't explain the reason why he only wanted a marriage of convenience. Rachel had no problem agreeing to his terms. She had already had a physical relationship with a man, and she had no desire to repeat it. The train's steam whistle sounded loudly, and Evelyn stirred. Rachel froze, waiting for her daughter to wake up from the sound like she had in the past, but she settled down and continued to sleep, making Rachel again sigh in relief. Evelyn desperately needed a good nap. Rachel gently laid Evelyn on the seat next to her and then leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. Maybe she would be able to get some sleep herself before they arrived. Thornton stood on the train station platform as he waited for the train to arrive with his fiancée and her baby. He felt an excitement at their pending arrival. He had enjoyed writing letters with Rachel, and he hoped they would at least be able to be friends after they married and continue the rapport they had started in the letters. He didn't mind that Rachel was widowed and had a daughter. He felt sorry for her that she had been widowed so soon after her daughter's birth, but he was glad she had a child since he knew most women wanted to have at least one baby, and under the terms of their agreement of a marriage of convenience, the baby she had now would be her only child. His parents had no idea he had been writing Rachel, and part of him felt remorse that they had no idea he would be marrying within a few hours. Only Dorothy knew everything, and she agreed to be a witness to the wedding. But he also knew he needed to make these decisions on his own. He needed to take a stand with his father and somehow give him the message that he couldn't control everything about Thornton's life. He would be married by the time he turned 25 in a few weeks. He would get his trust fund, and he would be able to move forward on his plans to become a minister. Thornton forced his mind from Rachel's arrival and smiled at the conversation he had just had with Mrs. Whiteman that morning. Without his father's knowledge, Thornton had been able to help the widow stay in her home and make the required payments. He had spent hours finding 4 single women who desired to stay in a boarding home. He helped them move into their new rooms and had directed Mrs. Whiteman to collect first and last month's rent. With his help, she had enough money to pay the bank what she owed. If she was able to keep her boarders, plus find a few more, she shouldn't have any problem continuing to make future payments. It felt good to be able to help Mrs. Whiteman. Her solution was fairly simple, and she didn't need to lose her home and all that she owned. This was what he wanted to do with his life: help people like Mrs. Whiteman. Suddenly he heard the train whistle and could see it approaching in the distance. He had a funny feeling in his gut that his life was going to change drastically, starting in a few minutes. Chapter 6. The train slowly came to a stop, and Rachel decided to wait to leave until everyone else had gotten off. Evelyn was still asleep, and Rachel wanted her to get every second of rest she could get. She wanted her to be happy when they first met Thornton, her new daddy. The train quickly emptied as people got off for a meal or to move on to a different destination. Rachel finally gathered her travel bag and scooped Evelyn up. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered when Evelyn whimpered as she awoke. "Let's get off the train and meet your new daddy." Evelyn straightened in her arms and looked curiously around her surroundings as Rachel stepped off of the train. "Careful there," the conductor told her as he took her arm and helped her down the stairs. Rachel smiled her thanks and looked around for a well-dressed man with dark hair. She immediately saw him. He stood a few feet away, and they both stared at each other for a moment. The man started toward her. "Are you Rachel?" the man asked. When she nodded, he continued, "I'm Thornton Winters." "It's nice to meet you. This is Evelyn," she introduced her daughter, who smiled shyly and then hid her face in Rachel's shoulder. "How was the trip?" he asked her politely. "It went as well as could be expected when traveling with a baby," Rachel answered. They stared at each other for a moment again, and Rachel felt something stir in her heart. She immediately pushed it away. The last thing she wanted was to be attracted to Thornton. "Shall we find your luggage?" he asked her. Rachel nodded and looked around and noticed a small pile of trunks that were being carried off of the train. "My trunk is that small black one over there." Thornton walked over and picked it up. "I have a carriage just over there. I'll put your trunk in the back and we can head over to the church." He walked toward a fine-looking carriage that was being pulled by a beautiful bay horse and helped Rachel into it. Thornton clicked at the horse, directing him to move. "I'm assuming you still want to marry right away like we agreed?" "Yes, I'm fine with marrying right away." Rachel glanced at him. "Will your family be meeting us there?" Thornton hesitated. "Only my sister, Dorothy." "Why won't your parents be there?" Thornton looked flushed. "I might as well tell you that my parents don't know that you're coming." "Why not?" Rachel's heart fell. Why weren't they coming? Did this mean they didn't approve of their son marrying her? In fact, they don't even know about you, period. Rachel was so shocked she couldn't say anything. She didn't think it was a good sign that Thornton hadn't told his parents about her or Evelyn. When are you going to tell them?" she finally asked. "After we're married." "Can I ask why you haven't told them about me?" "Sure, but all I'm going to say at this time is I have my reasons and I don't want to get into them right now. I guess you're going to have to just trust me." Rachel noticed that Thornton hadn't looked at her once during this conversation. "I don't understand. But I guess I'll trust you, as long as you promise to tell me why later." "I promise." Thornton looked at her with relief, gave her a slight smile, and then changed the subject. "Dorothy is looking forward to meeting you. Your daughter is very cute. How old is she again?" "She's 9 months old?" "I don't think you ever told me why your husband died." Rachel's heart started to beat quickly. She suddenly wasn't sure if she wanted to admit to him there was no late husband. Quickly justifying her thoughts, she decided since Thornton was keeping secrets, she could too. "I'm not sure I want to talk about it right now," Rachel said softly, hoping he would accept that answer. Thornton smiled down at her. "I guess we'll have a lot to talk about later, won't we?" She smiled and started to reply when Evelyn tried to get off her lap. "No, Evelyn, you must stay in my lap until the horse stops. Can you see the horse?" She spent the next few minutes talking to Evelyn and distracting her until they pulled up in front of a small white church. Her heart started to beat fast again. She knew in a few minutes her life was going to be very different. When Rachel entered the church, she immediately liked what she saw. It was a small building, but it had a small stained glass window right above the altar in the chapel. The wooden pews were old and scratched, but she felt at home. The minister approached them with a big smile. "Hello, I'm Reverend Brown. I'm honored to join you and Mr. Winters together in marriage and love." He held out his hand for her to shake. "I'm pleased to meet you," Rachel stammered over his comment about love. What had Thornton been telling people? She felt a presence behind her and turned. "Rachel, this is my sister Dorothy," Thornton said, introducing the beautiful young woman beside him. "Dorothy, this is Rachel and her daughter, Evelyn." After greeting each other, Dorothy reached out to Evelyn. "May I hold her? I love babies." You can if she'll let you, Rachel agreed and gave Evelyn to Dorothy, ready to take her back if Evelyn let out one of her loud screams of protest. But Evelyn smiled at Dorothy and started to play with her necklace. She really is very cute, Dorothy told her. I'll hold her for the ceremony if you'd like. Rachel liked Dorothy immediately. She was open and bubbly, and she could tell she loved her brother. We'd like to have the ceremony performed as soon as possible, Thornton told Reverend Brown. Can your wife be the other witness? Rachel could tell that Thornton was close to the Reverend by the handshake they gave each other, and this comforted her. She would enjoy coming to this small church every Sunday. Soon the Reverend had everyone standing in their places, and the words for the ceremony were said and repeated. When Reverend Brown told Thornton he could kiss the bride, Rachel's heart started to race, wondering what he would do. He had been insistent that their marriage be one of convenience. Did that mean no kisses? She noticed that Thornton hesitated at the Reverend's words, but bent his head and placed a chaste kiss on her lips. As quick as he started the kiss, it was over. Rachel was surprised to feel a distinct disappointment that the kiss hadn't been longer. All too soon, the small ceremony was over, and she and Thornton accepted everyone's congratulations. Mrs. Brown offered to serve everyone a late luncheon, but Thornton immediately declined. I would like to get my new bride and her baby settled before nightfall, he explained. Mrs. Brown gracefully accepted the decline, and soon Rachel found herself back in the bright Nebraska sunshine. Thornton helped her back in the carriage, and Dorothy joined them in the back seat. Rachel listened quietly as Thornton conversed with his sister. He hadn't said anything to her since the kiss, and she wondered what he was thinking. Evelyn needed her attention again, and Rachel was glad to have her daughter to divert her thoughts. She felt the carriage stop, and she glanced at the large house in front of them. Thornton jumped out of the carriage and helped his sister down. I'll bring Rachel and Evelyn over tomorrow evening and introduce them to Father and Mother. Tell Mrs. Newton we will stay for dinner. Dorothy nodded. I'll break the news to them tonight, like we talked about. And make sure they understand they aren't to come to my house tonight, Thornton said firmly. Rachel watched as he touched his sister's arm. Thanks for telling them for me, Dorothy. It might not seem right, but you know that I understand why, Dorothy said. She turned to Rachel. Have a good evening, Rachel. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for attending our wedding ceremony, Rachel told her. It was all she could think of to say. What was going on with Thornton and his family? She turned her attention to the house Dorothy was walking towards. It was a very large home, almost a mansion. It was larger than Mary's home she had lived in. Something clicked inside her, something that she probably should have picked up on but ignored the signs. Thornton's fancy handwriting showed he had received a high level of education. He worked at a bank. He wore an expensive suit, clothing she had seen Mr. Davis wear, and Michael for that matter. Thornton came from money. Rachel had put herself right back in the same situation she was running away from. Thornton climbed back in the carriage and directed the bay horse to move again. Is that your house? She tried to ask lightly. It's my parents' place. Dorothy lives there with them. I rent a small home that is located near the bank. Rachel relaxed a bit at his words. Evelyn started to fuss. I think she may be hungry, Rachel explained to Thornton. How long will it take to get to your home? Thornton looked startled. Only a few minutes. I'm sorry. I should have made sure she didn't need anything before we left the church. I'm afraid I'm not used to children and their schedules. She'll be fine until we get to your place if it really is only a few minutes away. But Evelyn soon started to cry in earnest, and by the time they arrived at Thornton's home, she was screaming loudly in protest. Thornton quickly stopped the horse and jumped down. Let's get you both inside so you can feed her. I'll bring your trunk in later after I take care of the horse and carriage. Thornton helped Rachel down and they quickly went into the home. Rachel wasn't able to really look at her surroundings since she was so focused on Evelyn. She followed Thornton down a small hall into a back room. This will be your room, Thornton told her. I'm afraid you will need to share with Evelyn since there are only 2 bedrooms in this house. That's fine. I would rather have her near me, Rachel told him as she laid Evelyn on the bed. She started to change Evelyn's diaper and then noticed Thornton hadn't left the room yet. She looked at him, a question in her eyes. He was leaning against the doorway, watching her with a peculiar look in his eyes. Did he need something? Thornton noticed she was looking at him. "I'll be in the kitchen when you are done caring for her." He turned to go, but then stopped. "Rachel, I'm glad you are here." Rachel smiled. "So am I." His words caused her heart to miss a beat. After Thornton left, closing the bedroom door behind him, Rachel finished putting a fresh diaper on Evelyn, and then sat in a rocking chair that had been placed in the corner of the room and began to nurse her. Evelyn settled down, and Rachel was able to relax and look around. The room was small but clean. There was a bed with a colorful patchwork quilt on it, with a crib next to it, and a colorful dresser sat under the window. She was pleased that Thornton rented his own house and didn't expect her to live in his parents' mansion. If she had married Michael, she knew she would have been expected to live with his parents, at least for a while. She wasn't sure how she felt about realizing Thornton came from money. How did she miss that in his letters? Was she too caught up in the idea of needing to leave that she inadvertently ignored the signs? If she had picked up on them, would she have changed her mind? "Well, it doesn't matter now," she whispered to herself. "I'll just have to make the best of things." She knew he still expected their marriage to be one of convenience. He obviously had made sure this room had everything she and Evelyn needed. It was nice to be able to rock her baby. A rocking chair was one item she hadn't had in Mary's home. She leaned her head back against the rocking chair and closed her eyes. Suddenly, she was very tired. When Evelyn finished nursing, she carefully laid the baby in her crib and covered her up with a small quilt. She looked at the bed beside the crib. "I'll just lay down for a moment," she decided. "Then I'll go find Thornton and see if he wants me to start dinner." Within a few minutes, she was fast asleep. Chapter 7. Thornton sat down at his kitchen table, waiting for Rachel to finish taking care of her baby and to join him. He had made arrangements to take the entire day off at the bank, although he hadn't said why. He had spent the morning cleaning up the house and getting the spare bedroom ready for Rachel. He knew his father wasn't happy he took the day off, especially when Thornton refused to tell him why. But his father would know the reasons soon enough. Dorothy would be telling their father and mother in a few hours about Rachel and Evelyn. He was pleased with Rachel. She was pretty, with brown hair with red highlights that showed up in the sun. Her eyes seemed to be the same color as his own. Her light blue dress was simple but clean, although it was wrinkled, most likely because of traveling. Evelyn was a cute little thing with the same color of hair as Rachel's that curled in ringlets on her head, although her eyes were bright blue. He hoped both of them would be able to settle in quickly with their new life in Nebraska. Now that he had some time to think about it, he remembered that she had been very vague about Rachel's late husband in her letters. She hadn't even mentioned his name. Thornton shook his head. He hoped she would tell him about her past when she felt more comfortable with him. After a while, Thornton realized he had been sitting at the table for almost an hour. Did it really take that long to feed a baby? He walked to Rachel's room. The door was only partially closed, so he carefully opened it. Rachel was on the bed, asleep, with Evelyn under a quilt in her crib. He smiled to himself at the sight. He knew Rachel must be very tired to fall asleep in the middle of the afternoon. He slowly closed the door and decided to spend his time making plans for his future schooling. If all went well, he should be able to start school at the first of the year. Thornton worked for quite a while, writing down his plans and ideas, crossing some off and deciding on new ones. Then he heard a cry, and he knew Evelyn was awake. He waited for her to quiet, letting him know that Rachel was also awake. But Evelyn continued to cry. He finally left his desk and knocked on Rachel's closed door. When she didn't answer and Evelyn continued her fussiness, he slowly opened it. Rachel was still sound asleep and Evelyn was standing in her crib. Thornton made an instant decision. "Come on, little girl," he whispered as he walked into the room and picked up Evelyn. "Let's let your mama sleep a little longer. She stopped crying, and he carried her out of the room. Sitting on his sofa, he held the baby. She didn't want to be cuddled, but did sit quietly in his lap, looking around the room. Everything probably looks different to you, right, Evelyn? But you'll get used to it soon. Evelyn looked at him when he talked. She reached a hand out to his face and pulled his hair. Then she smiled at him, and he noticed he already felt something for this child. She had another father, of course, but he was dead. For the first time, Thornton realized he was going to be Evelyn's father. He liked the idea of being an instant father. "I promise I will do my best to be a good father to you, Evelyn," he said to her quietly. "I will encourage you to make your own choices when you're grown." Evelyn gave him a big grin and then pushed herself off of his lap. Thornton set her down on the floor, and she started to crawl around. He instantly realized as she headed towards a stack of wood and a box of matches that were on the floor near the fireplace that he needed to make his house baby-proof. A chore he never thought he would need to do. Rachel stretched and slowly opened her eyes. She looked around at her unfamiliar surroundings and then remembered. She was in Lincoln, Nebraska. She had married Thornton just that day, and she must have fallen asleep after feeding Evelyn. Rachel sat up, looked in the crib by her bed, and gasped. Where was Evelyn? She quickly left her room in search of her daughter. What she found made her smile. Evelyn was crawling around Thornton's living room. He was busy putting chopped wood into a wooden crate. Evelyn picked up a small piece of wood and started to put it in her mouth. "No, little girl," Thornton said with a chuckle. "You're a handful, aren't you?" Rachel watched as he picked Evelyn up and took the wood from her, throwing it into the box. "Do you want a mouthful of slivers?" Thornton said as he ruffled her curls. "Look, I gave you some blocks to play with. Why aren't you staying over here?" He carried Evelyn to a corner of the living room where a few blocks were on the floor and set her down. He patted her on the head and then went back to his job of cleaning up the wood. Evelyn immediately started crawling back to the woodpile, ignoring the colorful painted blocks. Rachel couldn't help it, and she giggled. Thornton looked up and smiled when he saw her. "I hope it was okay I came and got her from your room. She was crying, and you were sleeping too soundly to hear." "Sure, it's okay. I'm surprised I slept through her crying, though. I usually wake up," Rachel said as she scooped Evelyn up just before she made it to the wood pile. "I realize my house isn't quite safe for babies," Thornton said as he gestured to the wood. "I can help you make it safe," Rachel offered. "Should I make dinner first?" Thornton shook his head. "I'm having tonight's dinner delivered by a nearby restaurant. I thought that would be easier this first day." Rachel was relieved to hear that. Even though she had a nap, she still felt tired. It would be nice to not have to worry about making a meal. Rachel sat down with Evelyn and distracted her by building a small tower with the blocks while Thornton finished his job with the wood. Evelyn laughed each time the blocks fell over. "She has a cute laugh," Thornton said as he sat down on the sofa next to them. "She sometimes gets this belly laugh. It makes everyone smile when they hear it," Rachel said with a smile. Rachel enjoyed the rest of the evening. Dinner consisted of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls, and apple pie for dessert. After dinner was cleared, Rachel discovered a bookcase full of books, and Thornton made the suggestion they read a book together each evening. Rachel loved the idea. She enjoyed reading. Thornton let her choose a book. After Evelyn was put to bed for the night, Thornton read the first few chapters. He also read a few verses out of the Bible. Rachel enjoyed listening to Thornton as he read. "Tomorrow I will be going to work at 8 in the morning," Thornton told her after he closed the Bible. "I will make sure you have a good breakfast before you leave," Rachel offered. "That would be nice, but you don't have to do that," Thornton said. "I've been making my own breakfast for quite a while. But we're married now. I want to do my part," Rachel argued. "I would like you to make a list of things you and Evelyn need. Also, if you see any food or supplies you might need in the kitchen, add them to the list. I will plan on coming home around mid-afternoon. We can go shopping. Then we will have dinner with my parents and Dorothy. Evelyn doesn't need much, Rachel told him. Maybe a few more diapers. Thornton looked directly at her. I want you to get a few dresses for both of you, or at least material to make yourself some. Okay, Rachel said, although she still felt uncomfortable. It was going to be different having someone else provide for her and Evelyn. She instantly made a promise to herself that she would make sure she prepared delicious meals for him and keep his small house clean. Thornton stood up and put the book and Bible away on his shelf. I'm going to turn in. Soon Rachel was alone in the living room, and she looked around at her surroundings. She liked Thornton's home. It was small but cozy. The living room had a red and yellow flowered sofa and 2 tanned cushioned chairs. There was a braided rug in front of the wood stove, and all the wood was now stacked neatly in a wooden box in the corner. There was a window that was covered with yellow curtains. The kitchen was the same size as the living room. It had a small table with 4 chairs in the middle of the room, a cook stove, cupboards with dishes, and a pantry. She decided she better get to bed. Evelyn still sometimes woke in the middle of the night to be nursed, and she wanted to make sure she rose early enough to make breakfast for Thornton. Chapter 8. After telling Rachel goodbye, he left his house and made the short walk to the bank. She had gotten up even earlier than he did and had prepared a large breakfast, cooking way more food than he was used to eating so early in the morning, but he knew he could easily get used to having a good breakfast every morning. He discovered quickly that Rachel was an excellent cook. When he arrived at the bank, he found his father already in his office waiting for him. It looked like the confrontation with his father was going to happen sooner rather than later. His father got right to the point. Dorothy told your mother and me some interesting news last night. I assume she told you about Rachel and our marriage, Thornton said as he settled himself down in his chair behind his desk. Why in the world would you marry someone we don't even know, and so quickly? His father thundered. You know why I married, Father. His father looked at him as if for the first time. Do you mean you married just to get your trust fund? Well, you did tell me I needed to marry before I turned 25 if I wanted that money. Otherwise, I would need to wait until I turned 30. I decided I didn't want to wait. I meant you should consider marrying Patricia, or another woman we know. I didn't mean you should bring some urchin we don't even know into our family. Rachel is a fine young woman. Any man would be lucky to marry her. Well, let some other man marry her then. His father stood. I'm sure I can arrange for an annulment. You have been only married less than 24 hours after all. Father, Thornton shouted, sit down. His father looked very surprised that Thornton would speak to him in this way, and he actually sat back down. I know this isn't what you wanted to happen, but I like Rachel. I will not agree to an annulment. I fulfilled the requirements you gave me to receive my trust fund, and you will allow that to happen. Thornton stood and faced his father man to man, possibly for the first time in his life. I will be bringing Rachel and her daughter over this evening for you and Mother to meet. You will treat her with respect. If I find that you cannot do that, I will stop interacting with you. I will quit my job here. You can't quit. You wouldn't be able to find a job anywhere else. You seem to forget, Father, that I have received an excellent education. I have been trained well by you. I can find a job at another bank in Lincoln, and if I can't, there are banks in other cities. His father sat down. Thornton could tell that his father knew he was serious and that he could follow through on his threats. After a moment, Thornton also sat. Father, please listen. I have done everything you have wanted me to do my entire life. I have done it out of respect for you and for our family name. But I am now an adult. I have my own plans, and marrying Rachel is the first step in fulfilling these plans. I don't want to leave Lincoln, but I will if I need to. His father stared him down carefully. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. You remind me of myself at your age. I did the same thing to my father. Then he frowned. What plans? I'm not ready to divulge them yet. Tell me about Rachel. She is a daughter, so she is a widow? Thornton sat for a moment, feeling shocked. Was this all he needed to do? Talk to his father man to man? It was almost as if his father was looking at him with a new respect in his eyes. Rachel is what is called a mail-order bride. She is from North Carolina. We have been writing for the last few months. She is a widow. She arrived yesterday and we married. She has a young daughter who is cute as a button. He smiled as he remembered the breakfast she prepared for him that morning. She is an excellent cook. Both men were silent for a moment. Thornton could tell his father wasn't pleased to hear that Rachel was a mail-order bride. In his social circles, a man courted a woman for many months and had at least a 6-month engagement period before marrying. Father, I know there are many young women in Lincoln who I could have married, but I didn't want any of them. I chose Rachel. I hope you will respect my decision. Let me ask you one question. Would you have married Rachel if I hadn't told you that you needed to be married to receive your trust fund? Thornton didn't say anything, letting silence answer his father's question. His father glanced at his pocket watch and then stood. Well, I look forward to meeting Rachel and her daughter this evening. I'm afraid I need to get ready for a meeting. Thornton watched his father leave his office and then leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed. The conversation with his father went surprisingly well, considering all that was talked about. He wanted to believe that his father had accepted his marriage to Rachel, but considering his past with his father wanting to control everything in his life, Thornton couldn't picture all of that coming to an end. He pulled a stack of papers in front of him, pushed his thoughts of his father and his new marriage out of his head, and prepared to start his day. He promised Rachel he would be able to leave by mid-afternoon, and he had a lot to accomplish before then. Rachel finished dressing Evelyn in anticipation of Thornton's arrival to take her shopping. She spent 2 hours that morning making the list he had requested. She would add items to the list, but it soon became very long, so she started over, trying to make it shorter. She didn't want Thornton to have to buy so much. She started from scratch, writing down the food and supplies they needed, along with a few items for Evelyn, but nothing was written down for herself. She had 2 everyday dresses and 1 Sunday dress, along with a hat and sturdy shoes. She knew she would need a coat when winter came, but decided to worry about that later. The front door opened and Thornton walked in. She smiled at him in welcome. For some reason, she had an urge to approach him with a welcome hug, and she took a step back to stop her impulse. She had to remember they had a marriage of convenience. "Hi, Rachel," Thornton greeted her, and then looked at Evelyn playing on the floor. He bent down and picked her up. "Are you ready to go?" Rachel nodded. She allowed Thornton to keep Evelyn, and they left the house together. As they walked down the street towards the stores, Thornton commented, "I thought we'd purchase the things we need and then have them delivered. When we are done, we can walk down to my parents' house." "That sounds fine," Rachel agreed. "It's a little bit of a walk to my parents' house, though. Maybe we should take the carriage." "I don't mind walking. Evelyn and I walked all the time in North Carolina." Thornton smiled. "Good." They spent the time strolling to the first store, telling each other about their day. Rachel handed him the final list she had written. Thornton looked it over carefully. "I see quite a few items for the kitchen, a dress and cloth diapers for Evelyn, but I don't see anything for you," Thornton finally said. "I don't need anything." He looked down at her. "We'll see about that." Then he smiled and reached for her hand. Rachel paused, looking at Thornton's hand. Did she want to allow him to touch her? She was already starting to care for him. Then she slowly placed her hand in his. "I thought we'd go to the general store and get the items we need for the kitchen. Then we'll go to a clothing store." Thornton held the door open for her, and she could hear a bell ring to announce their presence. A heavy-set woman turned from dusting a shelf and greeted them. "Hello, Mr. Winters, how are you doing this fine afternoon?" the woman called out. "Hi, Mrs. Steele, we're fine. How's Mr. Steele doing?" "He's doing much better. In fact, I know he's been wanting to thank you for the books you sent him," Mrs. Steele replied. "Tell him not to worry about it. I'm glad he enjoyed them. He can keep them as long as he wants. I'm sure it's hard to find things to do when you can't walk." Thornton turned to her. "Mrs. Steele's husband broke his leg a few weeks ago and has had to stay in bed." Rachel noticed Mrs. Steele look at her curiously. "And who is this?" the woman asked with a smile. "This is my wife Rachel and her daughter Evelyn. Rachel, this is Mrs. Ruth Steele. She and her husband own this general store." "It's nice to meet you," Rachel told her. She liked Mrs. Steele immediately. "Wife? I'd love to hear how that came about." Mrs. Steele looked at Thornton and then turned to Rachel. "Welcome to Lincoln. I hope you will be happy here." Thornton handed Mrs. Steele the list Rachel prepared. "Will you fill this order for me and put it on my account? It would also be nice if you could have it delivered to my house." "Sure, I can do that. Jimmy can deliver it for you." She pointed to a young man who was placing canned goods on a shelf nearby. Thornton turned to her. "Let's look around and see if there is anything you might have missed." Rachel agreed, but didn't feel comfortable adding anything else to the list. She watched as Mrs. Steele started to fill their order. When Thornton realized Rachel wasn't going to add anything, he gave Mrs. Steele a few things, including a picture book and a ball for Evelyn. "Evelyn doesn't need any toys," Rachel said to Thornton when he added them to the box of their food and supplies. "I brought a few things with me, and she is only 9 months old." "A book and ball isn't much," Thornton told her and took her arm. "Let's go over to the clothing store." Rachel didn't say anything and allowed Thornton to guide her out of the general store and into another a few buildings down the street called Pamela's Clothing Establishment. She tried not to gasp when she entered the store. It was full of ready-made dresses for women of all ages, including accessories, hats, and shoes. There was even a small area for young girls. She had never been in a store like it. "I really don't need anything," Rachel protested. The last thing she wanted was for Thornton to spend so much money on her. "And I can sew my own dresses if I need to." "That's good to know," Thornton told her. "But for now, I would like you to choose 2 dresses, a new hat, and 2 dresses for Evelyn." Rachel looked at Thornton in disbelief. She remembered how Michael would use his money to try and impress her. She knew Thornton's family had money, especially since seeing his parents' home. Most likely, Thornton had access to family money. Was he embarrassed with the way she dressed in her simple clothing? He probably was. She wanted to refuse, but she also knew that Thornton was in a different social class, like Michael was. She needed to dress the part. She slowly nodded her agreement, and Thornton smiled at her as if relieved. Rachel felt something shut down inside her. She had left North Carolina with her daughter in an attempt to start a new life. But she was now married to a man who was like Evelyn's father, where money was what was important over anything and everything else. Or was it really? Thornton seemed to enjoy purchasing things she and Evelyn needed. Maybe money wasn't as important to him as it had been to Michael. He had looked very happy when she finally agreed to the new dresses. She allowed the store clerk to help her choose 2 dresses, and they were beautiful. One of them was mint green with small white flowers, and the other one was a pretty peach color. She chose a hat to match and a pair of shoes when Thornton noticed hers were scratched and worn. Thornton had fun picking out dresses for Evelyn and Rachel. Didn't have the heart to argue with him when he picked out 3 instead of 2. She waited patiently while he paid for the clothing and made arrangements to have them delivered to his home. "Would you like me to change into one of the new dresses before we meet your parents?" Rachel asked him. Thornton looked at her, startled. "Only if you would like, Rachel. What you have on is fine. It isn't a formal dinner tonight." Rachel hesitated, then decided to slip into one of the new dresses. Instinctively, she knew she needed to look her best for dinner. After she changed into the peach-colored dress, she noticed Thornton's eyes light up in appreciation when he saw her, but he didn't say anything. He just picked up Evelyn and offered his arm. The walk to his parents' house did take a while. Evelyn wasn't easy to carry, wanting to get down and explore. Thornton stopped a few times to let her look at some flowers and to pet a friendly dog. Rachel watched him as he interacted with Evelyn with conflicting thoughts. She was having a hard time with his family's money, but he really was good with her daughter. They finally arrived at his parents' home, and Thornton opened the front door, letting them inside. The house was larger than Mary's home. Rachel could see a table that had a small basket with mail in it, along with a vase full of fresh flowers. There was a set of stairs that led to a second level. Thornton led her into a very fancy room, which Rachel assumed was the parlor, and where the family visited with guests. Thornton had directed a maid to find his mother. They only needed to wait a few minutes before a beautiful older woman glided into the room. She was beautifully dressed, almost as if she was going to a formal ball. Her hair had been done in a chignon, and not one strand was out of place. "Hello, dear." She went directly to Thornton and offered him her cheek for a kiss. "Hello, Mother." Thornton greeted her warmly. "It's good to see you. Come, let me introduce you to Rachel and Evelyn." Mrs. Winters turned to Rachel with a smile on her face. After the formal introductions, she surprised Rachel with a hug. She was obviously nothing like Michael's mother, who always treated Rachel like a servant that wasn't worth her time to even talk to. "Welcome to our home, my dear." She turned to smile at Evelyn. "Your daughter is adorable. How old is she?" "She's 9 months old, ma'am," Rachel responded. "There is no reason to be formal, dear." Mrs. Winters invited her to sit. After they were seated, the older woman turned to her son. "I have to admit, we were surprised at the news our daughter gave us about your marriage, Thornton." Mrs. Winters started right into the reason why they were there. "I do understand your why, though." Thornton nodded. "I'm sorry we didn't let you know about the marriage, Mother. I felt it was best we marry quickly. I have to admit, I do feel bad about that. But I'm grateful you at least included Dorothy in on your plans. I would like to plan a reception for you both." Thornton looked at Rachel as if asking her what she thought of the idea. "I think that's a fine idea, Mother. But why don't we hold off for a bit and let Rachel and Evelyn settle in?" Rachel was grateful for Thornton's suggestion and was glad when his mother nodded in agreement, although she did look disappointed. "I would like to know how you both met and how this marriage came to be, but I also know that now isn't the time. I think I will come and visit you tomorrow morning, Thornton. Is 10 o'clock okay?" After Thornton agreed to meet his mother the next morning, the same maid that Thornton had sent to find his mother re-entered the room. "Dinner is ready, Mrs. Winters," the woman said after she curtsied. "Thank you, Lucy." Mrs. Winters stood. "Dorothy and Mr. Winters are already in the dining room. Let's go join them." When Rachel entered the formal dining room, she saw Dorothy sitting in a chair, along with an older, distinguished-looking man who she assumed was Thornton's father. His father sat at the table holding his body very stiff, letting everyone know with his body language that he was in charge. He stood when they entered the room, but didn't smile. He held himself back as Thornton made the introductions, and didn't say a word, only nodding his head slightly when his son said his name. Rachel immediately knew he didn't approve of this marriage. "Your daughter is beautiful," Mrs. Winters said to Rachel after the introductions were over. "May I hold her? I am so excited to finally be a grandmother." Mrs. Winters' words settled Rachel's fears. She immediately knew that Mrs. Winters was going to be nothing like Michael's mother. She handed Evelyn to the older woman, who smiled in delight at the big grin Evelyn gave her. "See, dear," Mrs. Winters said to her husband, "she knows me already. Would it be all right if we placed her beside me for dinner, Rachel? That way we can get to know each other better." "That will be fine, Mrs. Winters," Rachel responded with a smile. "Oh, call me Louise," Mrs. Winters insisted. "After all, you are family, even if we have just met, and you can call my husband Richard." Rachel glanced at the older man, who frowned at his wife's words. She knew she couldn't call him by his given name until he gave her permission to do so. She turned her attention back to Mrs. Winters. "Thank you, Louise." The next few minutes were spent getting Evelyn settled in a small child's chair next to her new grandma. Rachel was able to sit on the other side of Evelyn, with Thornton across the table from Dorothy. A short prayer was said, and food was served before Mr. Winters cleared his throat. "Tell us about yourself, Rachel," he said, his words sounding like an order. Thornton said, "You are a widow?" "Yes, sir," Rachel said, hating herself even more for continuing the lie, but she knew it wouldn't be a good idea to admit she wasn't a widow to Thornton in front of his parents. "Where are you from, dear?" Louise asked pleasantly. Rachel thought she gave a firm look to her husband, which was ignored. "I lived in Jacksonville, North Carolina in a girls' home for the last 6 years. Before that, I lived in New York in an orphanage," Rachel responded, looking at Louise and not Mr. Winters. "New York? That's quite far from North Carolina. How did you end up there?" Dorothy asked. "A man who worked for the couple who owned the girls' home in North Carolina came and got me. A good friend of mine at the orphanage had been able to leave the year before, living at Mary's home. This man promised her that when there was another opening, I could come. So that was what I did a year later." This prompted many questions from everyone, and Rachel was able to explain the purpose of Mary's Home for Girls and how it worked. When Dorothy expressed sadness that she had lost her family, Rachel was able to tell her that she enjoyed living at Mary's home and hoped it would be around for a long time, since it helped many girls better their lives. Thornton was especially interested, and Rachel knew that most of the information she told his family he hadn't known about. He hadn't even known the reason why she had ended up at the orphanage. The only person who didn't ask questions was Mr. Winters, although Rachel didn't mind. It meant it was easier not to look at him as she talked to the others around the table. Mr. Winters greatly intimidated her. They talked about other things. Louise and Dorothy talked about an upcoming tea they were going to attend at a neighbor's home the next day. Dorothy asked her father if she could come to the bank sometime in the next week and help him. Her father refused her offer, and Rachel could tell Dorothy was very disappointed. "You should let her go, father," Thornton advised him. "You should be glad Dorothy wants to spend time there and with you. What would it hurt?" "It's best that she not be there," Mr. Winters retorted and looked at Dorothy. "I know I let you come when you were younger, but maybe I shouldn't have. You need to focus on other things." "What things, father?" Dorothy asked. "Embroidery and knitting? I want more out of life, you know that." "Let's talk about more pleasant things," Louise broke in. "I will talk to your father, dear. Maybe we can work out a compromise." She reached out and patted her daughter's hand. Dorothy's face cleared, and Rachel wondered if Louise would be able to get Mr. Winters to change his mind, and she found the thought very interesting. After dinner, Rachel joined Thornton and his family in the parlor. Louise had a small box of toys ready for Evelyn to play with, which made her like the older woman even more. They stayed for another hour talking about things that Rachel knew nothing about, and she was glad when Thornton caught her eye and nodded to her. "I think we are going to go home, Mother," Thornton said as he stood. Rachel immediately began to put away the toys Evelyn had been playing with. Even though the evening had gone better than she expected, she was still tense and was glad to leave the beautifully decorated formal home and go back to the simple, small house Thornton had rented. "Wait, Thornton," Mr. Winters ordered. "I have the paperwork ready in my study. You just need to sign it. Why don't you come with me and we can get that taken care of?" As Mr. Winters talked to Thornton, he was actually looking at her, not his son, and Rachel found that peculiar. It was almost as if he wanted her to know something. "No, Father," Thornton scowled. "I'm not 25 yet. It's not going to matter if I sign them now. I can do it at the bank or come over another time." "When do you turn 25? Rachel asked curiously. "In a few weeks," Thornton answered, still looking at his father. "We should have a birthday party for you," Dorothy broke in. "We can have a nice dinner and invite some of our friends so they can meet Rachel and Evelyn." Thornton smiled at his sister. "Thanks for the thought, sis, but I don't want to make a big deal out of my birthday. I'll just celebrate with Rachel." Rachel was relieved at his decision. She wasn't sure she was ready to meet a lot of new people. When Louise found out they walked, she offered to send for their driver to ready a carriage and take them home. Thornton looked at Rachel and then accepted the ride. Rachel was glad because suddenly she was very tired and wasn't sure she wanted to make the long walk to their home. Chapter 9. Sunday morning, Thornton informed Rachel that he wanted to go to church, which she was fine with. She found out that church started at 9 o'clock, so she quickly washed the dishes from breakfast and then gave Evelyn a bath. She chose one of the dresses Thornton bought for Evelyn to wear and then slipped on the mint green dress. Thornton had the carriage ready when Rachel came out of her room. She was glad to see he didn't expect them to walk since it was looking like it was going to be a hot day. It didn't take very long to drive there, and she was glad to see the same white church they were married in. After helping her down, he took Evelyn from her and offered his arm. He then led her into the building. She looked for his family, but didn't see them. "Will your parents be here?" she asked. Thornton shook his head. "They attend a much larger church. I prefer this smaller one. It's more personable, and Reverend Brown gives great sermons." Rachel wouldn't have admitted it to Thornton, but she was glad they weren't attending the same church as his parents. She still wasn't sure what they thought of her, and she knew she would enjoy the service more if she didn't need to worry about them. After that part of the service was over, she found she had enjoyed listening to Reverend Brown. He had spoken of honesty in all aspects of their lives. This caused a twinge of guilt in Rachel's soul. She still hadn't been able to bring herself to tell Thornton she really wasn't a widow. Reverend Brown was a good speaker, able to keep the congregation interested with scripture and real-life stories. She knew she would enjoy going to church in Nebraska. Next, everyone broke into smaller groups for Sunday school. They even had a class for babies, although Rachel didn't leave Evelyn in the room, preferring to keep the baby with her, at least for that day. She found out that Thornton taught a group of teenagers, and he invited her to join them. Over the next hour, she discovered that Thornton loved his class, and the teenagers loved and respected him. He gave a lesson about the prodigal son, going over the story until he knew all the teenagers understood what they could learn about this Bible story and how to bring it into their lives. He spent the last few minutes of the class talking to each of them. He smiled and laughed with the teens. She knew he had a gift for being able to interact with young people. He almost acted like a different person than what he showed to his parents, one that Rachel admitted to herself later she could easily fall in love with. With his parents, he was stiff and formal, much like Michael had acted around his family. In church, he was warm and energetic. She knew that when the class ended and all of the teenagers left to go find their families, that each one of them knew Thornton cared about them individually. It was something Rachel thought about over the next coming days. Chapter 10. A few days later, Rachel was washing the dinner dishes when there was a knock on the front door, and Thornton went to answer it. His heart fell when he saw who it was. "Father?" he greeted him. But he wasn't happy to see him. What was he doing at his home? The only time his father had come to visit was when he first moved in, and that was over a year ago. "Come in." "Thank you, son. I brought the papers by for your trust fund," Mr. Winters said to Thornton after he entered the small home. "Father, I thought I told you I would sign them later," Thornton angrily replied. He had specifically told his father he would sign them on the day of his birthday at the bank. Why did he bring them to his house? "Why don't you come into the kitchen and say hi to Rachel and Evelyn? I think there might be some cake left from dinner." "No, thank you," Mr. Winters answered. "May I sit?" Thornton wanted to shake his head, but he knew his father wouldn't leave until he accomplished what he had come for. He glanced at the kitchen door and wondered if Rachel would be able to hear their conversation. He knew he needed to tell her about the trust fund from his grandmother, but he wanted to tell her on his own time, not be forced into it. He finally gestured to the sofa and they both sat down. His father got right to the point. "I want to apologize to you. I can see now that I forced you into this marriage by insisting you needed to be married in order to get your trust fund early. But what's done is done. I see no reason to wait until your birthday. It will take a few days for these papers to be filed, and the money transferred to your account anyway." Thornton took the papers and looked them over. He saw the amount that would be transferred to his account. It was what he was expecting. Part of him was wondering if his father would try something else to keep him from getting the money, like insisting he receive the funds in installments, a little bit each year. He took the pen his father gave him and signed his name in the required spots. "Good, good," his father commented as he accepted the papers from Thornton. He looked into his eyes. "I really hope you know I am sorry. I am starting to see that I have been treating you just like my father treated me. I remember hating it. If I hadn't enjoyed working at the bank so much, I most likely would have moved somewhere else." Thornton felt a little guilty at his father's words because that was exactly what he was planning, but he pushed it away. He wasn't going to let his father know of his plans until he had the money in his account. He didn't want to give his father a reason to change his mind. "I am happy with Rachel, father," Thornton told him. "We may have not met by the standard way, but I don't regret marrying her." "Yes, I could see that at the dinner the other night," his father said. "And her daughter is a cutie." "Father, may I ask something?" Thornton questioned. "What is it?" "Why don't you let Dorothy learn how to work in the bank? You know that she wants to. She has always had an interest in the bank. And you did just hire a woman to work as a teller." He spoke of the first woman his father had ever hired, and who was doing very well at her job. His father scowled. "You know why I hired Mrs. Clark. Her husband had worked with us before his death, and she sometimes would help him. Mrs. Clark already knew how to do the job." "Dorothy doesn't need employment." "No, she doesn't, but I think she really wants to learn," Thornton insisted. "I don't think this is a passing fancy for her like some of her other projects. She loves numbers and is good with them. In fact, I'm going to admit that when we were growing up, she was better with numbers than I was." "She should be finding a man to marry and start a family," her father retorted. "Father, Dorothy is 19. I'm sure she will marry when she finds someone she can love. I am just suggesting to let her work at the bank. Start her at the bottom like you did me. Let her prove herself. Don't force her to marry before she is ready." Thornton knew his words struck a chord in his father. He knew his father really did regret his actions in forcing Thornton to marry because of the trust fund. One of the positive things about his father was that he never made the same mistake twice. Thornton knew he would not force Dorothy to marry. After a moment, his father nodded. "I'll think about it." Thornton smiled. "That's good enough for now." His father stood. "Now I need to go. I have to meet with the mayor before I head home." His father turned to leave, but then stopped. "Oh, by the way, I've been meaning to tell you that I'm glad you worked out a solution for Mrs. Whiteman. I went to visit her this morning, and it looks like she has things in control, and she will be able to make her payments." Thornton was so shocked at his father's words, he didn't know what to say. Did his father just praise him for helping a customer keep her house, instead of allowing a foreclosure to happen? "Tell Rachel goodbye for me." His father left with a wave. As Thornton closed the door, he wondered at the change in his father. He knew that his father would always put the bank's interests first, but maybe he was starting to see that there was more than one way to solve a problem. He looked at the kitchen and noticed it was very quiet in there. He knew that Rachel had to have heard his conversation with his father. She now knew about the trust fund. He sighed and wished again that his father had respected his desire to let him sign the papers at the bank. He hadn't planned on keeping the money a secret from her forever. He just wanted to be able to tell her about it himself. He walked into the kitchen and saw that Evelyn was on the floor chasing after the ball he had given her. Rachel sat at the table looking pale with a shocked look on her face. It was time to do damage control. "What did your father mean? You married to get your trust fund?" Rachel asked, her voice shaking with disbelief when she saw him. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Thornton told her and sat down at the table next to her. "I guess I might as well tell you everything. My grandmother set up trust funds for both Dorothy and me. We can receive those funds when we turn 25. However, my father is the caretaker of the trust funds, and a few months ago he informed me I had to marry to receive mine. Otherwise, I wouldn't get the money until I'm 30. Rachel's heart fell, and she did her best to not break down in tears. Just as she suspected, she had married into the same situation she had with Michael. Only in the end, Michael didn't really want to marry her. He only wanted the only gift she would never be able to give any other man: her virginity. Evidently, Thornton married her only so he could get his trust fund. She picked up Evelyn and turned to leave the kitchen, doing her best to keep the tears from falling. "Rachel, wait," Thornton called to her. "I know what this looks like, but I would like to tell you the reason why I need access to the trust fund." Rachel turned to look at him. "I know why you want it. It's always about money, isn't it?" She continued to her room. And this time, Thornton let her go. Once inside her room, she wiped at her tears angrily. She was such a fool. What was she going to do? She was also disappointed. Thornton was wonderful with Evelyn. She could tell that he would be a good father. Rachel was also starting to care for him even though she was trying not to. Why hadn't Thornton just been honest with her? She would have understood if he had told her why he needed to marry, wouldn't she? After all, she had her own reason why she wanted to marry. When she thought of that reason, her heart dropped, and she realized she was being hypocritical. She was upset that Thornton hadn't told her the truth, but she hadn't been totally honest with him. He still believed she was a widow. In fact, she was starting to convince herself that maybe she never would need to tell him. Thornton had his secrets, and she had her own. She numbly got Evelyn ready for bed, and in a few minutes, the baby was asleep in her crib. Rachel sat on her bed and realized that she needed to make some major decisions. She looked in the crib to make sure Evelyn was asleep for the night, and she added another blanket over the one that was already covering her daughter. As she gazed at Evelyn, love flooded her heart. She hated what Michael had done to her, but for the first time, she admitted she wouldn't trade Evelyn for anything. She had come to Nebraska to start a new life for herself, and so Evelyn wouldn't be treated like an outcast. She lay down on her bed, pulling the colorful quilt over her. Did she really have the right to be so upset at Thornton because of the trust fund? She knew she needed to tell him the truth about Evelyn. They were both hiding things and not being totally honest with each other. Maybe it was time that they both put out everything on the table and see where it all led. Maybe there was still a chance they could have a good marriage, even though it was one of convenience. Chapter 11. The next morning, Rachel rose early as usual and made breakfast. Thornton came out of his room looking surprised that she was at the stove scrambling eggs. He leaned against the kitchen doorway with a question in his eyes. "Breakfast is almost ready," Rachel told him with a small smile. "Rachel, about last night." "I think we need to talk," Rachel interrupted. "Do you need to go to the bank today?" Thornton shook his head. "It's Saturday, so no, I don't need to go in." He came and stood beside her. He reached his hand out as if to take her hand, but pulled it back at the last second, as if he wasn't sure she would accept his touch. "Let's eat this breakfast you have prepared and then talk." Rachel gave him another small smile and quickly finished cooking the eggs. Very quickly, she added the eggs to the bacon and toast that was already on the table. Thornton said a blessing on the food and they both ate silently. After the first bite of eggs, Rachel heard Evelyn cry out, and so she rose to get her. When she returned, Thornton had already prepared a small plate for Evelyn. After they ate, Thornton entertained Evelyn in the living room while Rachel did the dishes. When she was finished, she joined them. Thornton placed Evelyn on the floor with some of her toys to keep her occupied, and then joined Rachel on the sofa. "Rachel, I want to apologize for not telling you the whole reason why I needed to marry, and why I sent away for a mail-order bride instead of marrying a woman here in Lincoln." Rachel held up her hand. "Wait. Before you say anything else, I need to tell you something." Thornton quieted, waiting for her to continue. When she didn't, he asked, "Rachel, what is it?" "I need to apologize, too. I was very angry at you last night for not being honest with me, but I haven't been honest with you." "What do you mean?" Rachel took a deep breath and said as quickly as she could, "I'm not really a widow. I have never been married." Thornton looked confused. When Rachel didn't immediately say anything, he stood up and started to pace. Rachel didn't dare say anything. After a few minutes, he turned to her. It looks like we both have been keeping secrets from each other. I realize our marriage isn't meant to be a real one, but I think we both need to be upfront with each other from this point on. Do you agree? Rachel looked at him with hope in her eyes. Yes. She was shocked. He didn't seem as upset as she thought he'd be. Thornton sat back down beside her. Okay, you tell me why you married me, and then I will tell you why I married you. Rachel nodded. She quickly told him the entire story of how she met Michael, how he lied about his engagement, got her pregnant, and then married his fiancée, then left North Carolina. She explained how some of the other girls who had lived at Mary's home had become mail-order brides, and how she decided to do the same. She told Thornton she was a widow because she wanted him to give her a chance before learning that Evelyn was born out of wedlock. Were you ever going to tell me? Thornton questioned. Rachel hesitated. I kept promising myself I'd tell you. I was going to tell you in my last letter, but then I decided to tell you when I arrived. Then I decided I'd tell you a few days later. I guess I kept chickening out. I have to tell you, if I knew where this Michael was, I'd beat him to a pulp. Having money doesn't give anyone the right to treat someone the way he treated you, Thornton said angrily. Then his face softened as he looked at Evelyn as she played with her blocks on the floor. As far as I'm concerned, Evelyn is my child. I would like to adopt her. I am willing to not tell my parents or Dorothy about your past. It will be our secret. Really? Rachel asked, tears forming in her eyes. Of course, Thornton said firmly. I understand why you made the decisions you did, and now it's my turn. I hope you will understand why I have made the decisions I've made. I'm willing to listen, Rachel responded. If you haven't been able to notice yet, my father is quite controlling. He has tried to control me my entire life. I had to go to the schools he wanted me to go to. I had to take the classes he wanted me to take. He wanted me to get all the education I could get so I would be able to eventually take over his position at the bank. The problem is, he never asked me what I wanted. I have to admit, part of all of this is my fault. I never stood up to him and told him what I wanted to do. Like I told you last night, a few months ago he told me I wouldn't receive the trust fund my grandmother set up for me when I turned 25 unless I married. I instantly knew why he was making the change. It was another way to control me and keep me under his thumb at the bank. For some reason, he knew I had been waiting to turn 25 so I could claim that money, but he doesn't know why I wanted it. Thornton glanced at her while he spoke, as if trying to gauge her thoughts about his story. Go on, Rachel said, letting him know she was listening. Ever since I was young, I've wanted to be a minister. I wanted to go to school to be trained to become one. Reverend Brown knew about my plans and was going to help me. I didn't dare tell Father about my dreams, though. He wouldn't understand. Sometimes I think his only purpose in life is to control me so I would eventually take over his position at the bank. I want that money so I can quit my job at the bank, so I can go to school and become a minister. I also would like to move to a small town that needs a minister. I want to go somewhere where I can make a difference in people's lives. That's the reason why you want the money? So you could have the freedom to make your own decisions about your future? Rachel asked, trying to make sure she understood what he was telling her. Yes, Thornton nodded. Although I now realize this will affect you too. You would need to be willing to support me while I go to school. Not financially, of course. The trust fund is quite large, and we would be able to live on its principal while I am in school. And you would need to be willing to move to a small town if that's where God leads us. Oh, Thornton, of course I would support you in this, Rachel breathed with a smile. I am starting to see that having money isn't all bad. It's what you do with it that matters. I want to use some of the trust fund to help others, especially teenagers. In fact, maybe we can start our own girls' home or a boys' home and run it like your Mary's home. I wouldn't want to limit it to just orphans, and I'd prefer most of them to be teenagers. There are so many kids out there who could use a second chance. I love that idea, Rachel said happily. So, I guess we have both been keeping secrets. Now everything is out in the open, right? Rachel nodded. Let's promise each other that we will never keep anything from each other again. Agreed? There is one more change I'd like to make. What's that? Rachel asked. I know it was my idea that this be a marriage of convenience, but I would like to consider changing that. Rachel didn't know what to say. Was she ready to make this a real marriage? What do you mean? I suggest you let me court you for a period of time, like I would have if we were both single, living here in Lincoln. Let's spend the next few months getting to know each other better. School starts for me in January. Maybe by then we will be comfortable enough with each other that we can make this into a real marriage. Does that sound okay to you? Rachel smiled. I like that idea. Chapter 12. Summer of the following year, 1900. Rachel folded the last of Evelyn's clothes and carefully put them in the trunk. She could hear Thornton in their bedroom taking apart their bed. They were packing in preparation to move to Missouri so Thornton could begin his schooling to become a minister. It was the same college Reverend Brown had attended, and Thornton felt it was one of the best schools around. She sat down on the bed in Evelyn's room for a moment's rest and thought over the last few months. Thornton had wanted to leave immediately after he received his trust fund, but Rachel was able to point out to him that he needed to be fair to his father. He needed to keep working until he could train someone to take his place at the bank. Eventually, Thornton saw the wisdom of her suggestion and agreed. The conversation they had with Thornton's parents when he told them about his plans went better than they expected. His father wasn't happy, of course, but eventually he agreed to support him, especially when he heard that they weren't leaving right away. Mr. Winters finally agreed to let Dorothy start working part-time at the bank, and she loved her job. It took a few months, but Thornton was able to hire a man who worked with loans at a bank in another city. His name was Todd, and he fit in immediately at Winters Bank. Todd also took an interest in Dorothy, and just last week he had asked Mr. Winters permission to court his daughter, which was granted. Rachel knew that if things worked out between them, Mr. Winters would have a son-in-law who would be able to eventually take over his position at the bank. Rachel heard Evelyn cry, so she stood and went to find her daughter. Evelyn was into everything. The only time she wasn't moving at a fast speed was when she was asleep, and even then she twitched and moved in her dreams. She was a happy child and loved to be with her daddy. Rachel found Evelyn standing on top of the wood pile, clinging to the edge of the shelf that was above the fireplace. "Oh, Evelyn," she laughed as she lifted her daughter to the floor. She bent and used a handkerchief to wipe tears away from Evelyn's face. "You're going to hurt yourself someday if you keep climbing like that." She heard a chuckle behind her and saw that Thornton had come to see what the commotion was about. "She's my little monkey, aren't you?" Thornton asked the child as he swung her high in the air. Evelyn's cries turned to laughter. "Higher, Daddy," she demanded, and laughed as Thornton swung her in the air again. He then set her on the floor. "You need to go play with your toys while your mother and I finish packing," Thornton told her. Evelyn obediently went to the corner of the living room where her toys were kept and picked up a doll. Thornton turned to her. "I'm almost done taking our bed apart. Then I can start with Evelyn's crib." "Great. I finished packing her clothes. I'll go start packing the dishes." Rachel started towards the kitchen when Thornton stopped her. "Are you sure you want to go to Missouri?" he asked, looking a little concerned. "Of course, Thornton," Rachel responded with a smile. "This is your dream, and your dreams are now my dreams. I know the next few years will be hard while you are in school, but I'm excited to see where God leads us." Thornton gathered her into his arms. "Remind me to thank my father the next time we see him." "Why?" she asked him, looking into the face she had fallen in love with. "Because if he hadn't made the change to the trust fund, I never would have met you. You have changed my life for the better, both you and Evelyn. I want you to know I love you very much." Rachel smiled. Thornton had told her he loved her a few months ago, and he made it a habit to say those words to her almost daily, but she knew she would never tire of hearing them. I love you too. I guess I should thank your father also. I'm excited to start the new phase of our lives, and I'm excited to share it with you," she told him. He bent down and gave her a kiss, which he intensified as soon as their lips touched. Feelings of love for her husband spread throughout her entire soul. They were interrupted by another cry from Evelyn. Thornton looked over Rachel's shoulder to the corner where Evelyn was supposed to be playing. "The little imp is gone again." Rachel laughed. "I'll go find her. Maybe it will be best if I take her for a walk and tire her out. She might take a long nap this afternoon and we can finish packing before the man you hired comes with his wagon to move our things." Thornton agreed with her plan, and she followed Evelyn's cries into the kitchen. This time she had moved a kitchen chair in front of the cupboard where the glasses were kept. The chair had fallen over backward, and Evelyn was hanging on the counter with her arms, her little legs kicking as she tried to keep herself from falling to the floor. "What do you want, Evelyn?" Rachel asked her as she gathered her daughter into her arms. "Drink," the child demanded. "Drink, please," Rachel corrected her as she gave her a glass of water. "Drink, please." Evelyn drank deeply, and then handed Rachel the glass with her sparkling smile. "Let's go for a walk," Rachel suggested as she set Evelyn down on the floor. Evelyn liked the idea and ran to the door. She loved being outside. As Rachel walked down the street with her daughter's hand in hers, she felt content. She loved forming a new family with Thornton and looked forward to starting their new life together. They were beginning a new family legacy.